Hey guys, it's Judy from Nutrition with Judy. Thanks for joining me today. While you're here, please make sure to like and subscribe. My name is Judy Cho, and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition. And I have a private practice where we focus on root cause healing, and it often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today, I have the pleasure and honor of sitting down with Sharon Kramer. Sharon Kramer is a whistleblower and has shared so much fraud and crimes against the environmentally ill by some policymakers that have put just junk science into how mold is not making us sick. Sharon Kramer was a real estate agent as well as expert in sales and marketing and health marketing when her daughter and herself got sick from a water leak in their home. Sharon became an accidental advocate and now supports the community by trying to change and fight policy. In this episode, you'll hear Sharon talk about the corruption that has led us to believe why mold is not a big deal, when it is, in fact, a big deal for our health. She talks about all the different governmental bodies and agencies and judges that were part of this whole scam that has caused us to now deny mold in workers' comp claims, have very low levels of mold coverage in insurance policies, and overall, how only maybe black mold is considered bad, or generally that mold is not that bad for you, and that you can cover it up with paint or bleach, and you should not do any of those things. But how we have come to believe that. And she shares a lot about the history. Sharon has been advocating for this for the last 17 years, has been on the Hill in front of so many different panels for different governmental bodies and agencies to really fight this mold issue and the fraud science that has been propagated and used to cover up insurance fraud as well as coverage for people that are really sick from mold. In other interviews, she has shared about health marketing, which is basically where you learn to read studies and understand how science comes about and then use it in a way to then share marketing so that people will purchase or people will have different perspectives based on your writing piece. So she saw how a lot of the science that came around mold was written in a way to make mold not seem like it's a big deal. And when she saw a lot of the fraud, she decided to take a stand. And that's why she keeps advocating to this day. Sharon has even been jailed for her stances and what she's been advocating for the environmentally ill. I really hope that if anything that you get from this is that you don't scoff at mold illness or that you say mold cannot hurt anyone, because when you do that, you are supporting this fraudulent science that has been propagated to then not only have military housing that still is infested with mold and that nothing gets done by it. And it's the people that are protecting our country. And then not only that, it is supporting workmen's comp to not cover mold illness. So these people have to go back into their jobs that are making them sick, not get paid for it, and still have to work these jobs to support their families. So I just ask that we consider before we scoff at mold or say that mold is everywhere, mold is nothing that we can do about it. Because when we're doing that, we are supporting fraudulent science and the fraudulent people that have made so much money off of this. Let's get right into the interview. Hi, Sharon. I am so excited to have you on my channel today. It's an honor to have you on my channel just from all the work that I've seen you do. And it's kind of dangerous work too, to be honest. And I have so much respect and regard because the work that you are doing is indirectly impacting my community so much. So if you can introduce yourself to the people that are listening and watching.
Thank you. Yes, sure. My name is Sharon Noonan Kramer, and I live in Southern California. And I have a degree in marketing from the University of Mississippi way back when. I'm not going to tell you what year, it's so long ago. I've always made my living in marketing and sales. So out of college, I went to work for a National Cash Register company, NCR, selling computers. And from that, my education was they had something called Sugar Camp. It used to be the most professional training facility for salespeople in the world. So you'd go back there and you would learn how to market concepts to cause decisions, sales. So that's my background. I'm trained in understanding how concepts are marketed to cause decisions. I had a leak in an ice maker line in 2001 that just really was a watershed moment in my life. I saw one of the most ugliest marketing campaign I have ever seen in my life. And what happened was, beginning in 2001, the Department of Health and Human Services, they let some of the veteran environmental policy writers, primarily from CDC and CDC NIOSH, paired up with expert defense witnesses from Big Tobacco. They were professional expert defense witnesses. And beginning in 2001, they were basically given carte blanche to decide what would be considered current accepted evidence-based science regarding maladies caused by water damaged buildings. Well, what they wrote was just blatant scientific fraud. The point of it is to help insurers and government avoid liability for causation of these disabilities. Then what they do, they're policy deformers. They deform the policies which fit with their expert opinions, because then that makes their opinions look more credible in court. And that's why it's so hard to win mold cases. But what it also did as a secondary factor is it left people who are having these severe illnesses, like chronic cognitive difficulties, bleeding lungs, and just a vast array of inflammation throughout the body. It left them being called liars and scammers by our government. Mainly, this fraud comes out of HHS. So it's difficult. That's why people like you are so important, who stand up and say, wait a minute, this isn't right. These illnesses really are occurring in these people, and they need help to get better. So I have a degree in marketing, but there's a related field that I've been studying for quite some time, and it's called agnotology. Agnotology is the study of culturally induced ignorance or doubt based on the manipulation of scientific data. And
So, do you want to talk a little bit about, so just to get the lay of the land of how this all became, do you want me to share the file that you had sent me? And then do you want to
yeah,
talk through it?
this is the United States Department of Health and Human Services conspiracy theory. There's a web page that's called Basic Facts About Mold and Dampness, that it's really slick the way this little page works. Because if you change the content of that page, you change what CDC is marketing to physicians, to other policy setters, to the public. It's been in effect, I think, since about 2005, and you can track it by using the Wayback Machine. You know what that is? It's
Yes.
an archive. I can tell that days before Christmas in 2019, this following disinformation was added to that page. A link between other adverse health effects, such as acute idiopathic pulmonary hemorrhaging in infants, memory loss, and lethargy in molds, has not been proven. There is no blood test for mold. That's the heart of HHS's disinformation. They're claiming these illnesses, they claim these illnesses are proven not to be. What you'll see is in the year of 2000, CBS News ran a televised report called An Insidious Mold. And it was about a woman named Melinda Ballard. Melinda was an heiress to the Goldman Sachs fortune. Her father was one of the founders. And so Melinda had considerable amount of income. And she also had a PR firm in New York. So she was able to get the word out about the illnesses that her family was experiencing. She had a moldy mansion in Texas that the insurer was not addressing the remediation properly. And if you go down a little farther on that exhibit, you'll see what she was reporting was coughing up blood, so pulmonary hemorrhaging, their stomach problems, vomiting. She had trouble equilibrium balances. He couldn't breathe. Her husband couldn't breathe. He started coughing up blood. And then he became so forgetful that he couldn't even work. He couldn't function. They're experts claimed that the black mold Stachybotrys was what was causing the problem. And Stachy produces mycotoxins, and it's known that mycotoxins can damage the lung and the central nervous system. Well, when you have a water damaged building, you don't just have mold and you don't just have mycotoxins. There are multiple contaminants in there. I'm not a scientist or a physician, so I try to stay away from discussing the science part to it. So as of 2000, it went out publicly via this televised 48 hours. These moldy buildings can cause these types of symptoms. So Melinda she was the epitome of a Southern steel magnolia. She was from Arkansas and she was outspoken. And so they sued their insurance company. In June of 201, there was an eye-popping $32 million jury verdict for the plaintiff. It was for bad faith and punitive damages. And in other words, it wasn't that it was proven that the mycotoxins caused their illnesses. It was that negligent acts of the insurers caused the problems. So it left the question open. Do mycotoxins cause these illnesses or do they not? So it shit shockwaves through the insurance industry and through government that, oh my gosh, we're going to be on the hook for all these illnesses. The insurance company had been quietly paying out settlements prior to this, but this raised awareness on a national level. Melinda did. In late 2001, the late John Marburger III was appointed the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy under George Bush Jr. Some Republican congressman, Gary Miller from California, had something called the Congressional Mold Group. They wanted to shut down the liability for the insurance industry. This conference, you won't find this conference anywhere on the internet. It's been scrubbed. It's called Mold Medicine and Mold Science. It was held in Washington, D.C. in May of 2002. What this is the first evidence of HHS employees teaming up with big tobacco scientists who became the main expert defense witnesses in mold litigation to set the standard of care. Dr. Harriet Burge is from Harvard. You'll also find her name in the Big Tobacco Legacy Library as being affiliated with the front group, the Center for Indoor Air Research. I attribute Dr. Burge accountable for being the one who promoted the concept that you can just paint over mold and it'll be fine. Paul Haley is a neuropsychologist. You can find his name in the Big Tobacco Library. What he did, he developed something called the fake bad scale. It's part of the Minnesota multiple personality test. Anyhow, what it does is if you're a plaintiff with a brain injury, and it's not just for mold, you're forced to take these tests, these personality tests. And the fake bad scale, almost everyone who takes it is found to be a malingerer or have somatization disorder. It's designed to make you look like you're crazy. Mold hype and mold science. Ron Gotts, he's in the Big Tobacco Legacy Library too. What Dr. Gotts' claim to fame is he was the subject of a Dateline report called The Paper Chase. I think that was in 2000. And what he was doing was called paper reviews for the insurance industry. So like if somebody had a claim and they weren't happy when the insurance company denied it, they would send it to Dr. Gott's company and he would do a paper review saying, yes, I'm a medical expert and we've reviewed it and your claim is nothing. Elena Page and Doug Trout, they're from CDC NIOSH, and she's actually a medical doctor. She would come out for NIOSH if people have complaints that they were sick from mold, and she would be sent out to do their surveillance. She would take the party line, yeah, no, mold doesn't cause memory loss and all this. But her claim to fame is she authored a paper and it's published in MMR Review Weekly. And she cautioned about physicians using the mycotoxin urine tests to establish causation from mold, which She's not wrong about that. You can't just use a urine test and say that you've proven mycotoxins. But the way that it was phrased, it made it look like mycotoxin urine tests are completely irrelevant. Again, I'm not a scientist, but I know that they can be used to add a little piece to the puzzle at
Sure.
least. If you've got the same thing in your blood that's in the building at higher levels, it doesn't prove anything, but it adds to it. Emil Bardana was a professional expert defense witness. He's affiliated with the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. My understanding is he came to the mold issue from being an expert defense witness regarding formaldehyde. Stephen Hayes, The Science and Art of Environmental Mold Investigation. But then again, you go back down to GOTS, correcting mold misinformation. So this was a direct attack on what Melinda had gotten out publicly and the $32 million verdict. Okay, Corinne Robbins, Lonnie Swenson, and Bruce Kelman are co-owners of the corporation Global Tox Inc. And that's the company that the courts have been framing me as libeling since 2008. Kelman is a toxicologist, and so with the PhD. So he doesn't examine anybody. All he can do is take data from someone else's research, add extrapolations, and come up with risk assessment models. And so this is where the real problem is. The extrapolations by Kelman and his business partner, Brian Harden, who's also a co-owner of Global Tox. Harden retired as a U.S. Assistant Surgeon General and Deputy Director of CDC NIOSH in 2000, and he began working with Kelman in 2001 as expert defense witnessing. OSHA proposed rule for indoor air quality. I would have to say that OSHA has ended up being one of the more honorable federal agencies regarding this issue. OSHA really has done a lot to try and curtail the problems in the issue. Dr. Ruth Etzel was an epidemiologist at CDC, and Dr. Dora Dearborn was a pediatrician at the Cleveland Clinic. And they examined, there was an outbreak of several infants who died from pulmonary hemorrhaging. And they brought it to light that these children were also living in moldy environments. And the CDC came after them. They got this panel of outside experts, and it's like, well, no, you can't prove that. Ruth left the CDC. Dor got some money to research it, and he did. My understanding is he did ultimately establish it within something like a 90% interval of certainty that the mold and mycotoxins in the water damaged homes played a significant role in the deaths of these infants who died from pediatric pulmonary hemorrhaging. So that's why if you go back to that 219 of CDC claiming there's no proof of this, there's no proof of that, that's not true. There have been a lot of cases between when all of this went down, like the Detroit air traffic controllers. They won their workman's comp from the Department of Labor in 2009 and it's very specific that they were having cognitive difficulties, that couldn't work, having neurological problems, stuttering. For CDC to do that in 2019, it's beyond the pale. I'll tell you why this is so bad. In addition to everything else, it's because the military families have been going to Washington, D.C. since 2018. I don't know if you've been watching any of it, but they had Senate hearings about how poorly these families are being treated by the military housing landlords.
It sounds like the very first publicly, based off that ABC expose, there was Belinda that shared her story that she got paid $30+ million. And while they didn't say definitively it's mold, they said that there was negligence on the insurance agency. And then soon after, they created this convention where they had all of these very governmentally connected people that are also connected to the tobacco industry to sort of make a stance of mold is not harmful for us. And then fast forward some time, it looks like CDC also changed their website where now they're changing the definition of mold. If you go back on the way back website where you can see what was previously on the CDC website, it didn't have those comments about mold not affecting us, especially Stachybotrys. Is that so far sort of the lay of the land in the understanding?
Correct. It's a problem that hit public light in the 2000s. CDC, NIH took the low road and worked with the tobacco industry expert defense witnesses and created this. It's a conspiracy theory,
right,
promoted by our government that moldy buildings do not cause these illnesses that they really do. To go back to the year 2019, December of 2019, the senators and congressmen of the United States had been holding a lot of televised hearings about how they were going to get to the bottom of how the military families are being treated so badly. And, why are these landlords getting away with these children are sick? They're not getting help. They're December of 19, somebody corrupted that webpage. And I'm sorry, that's not an accident, because what happened was part of the protecting the military families was the military families tenant bill of rights. And so the inspector general of the Department of Defense was supposed to look at what the Department of Defense is doing to track these illnesses from the military housing. The inspector general issued their report in April of 2002, citing what illnesses moldy buildings are capable of causing. And they quoted verbatim from this CDC webpage. They didn't add this part about there's no adverse health effects such as acute pulmonary hemorrhaging, memory loss, but they inferred it by going directly to this page about dampness and mold, which basically says, mold can cause, stuffy nose, allergy, but the DOD is not tracking the pulmonary hemorrhaging, the memory loss, the chronic inflammation that is actually occurring in the military families. And if you don't track these illnesses and you don't acknowledge that they're being caused by the military housing, then of course there's not going to be any liability for the military housing landlords for causing these illnesses that HHS promotes housing doesn't cause.
Why is it that, I'm stating the obvious, but why is it that the governmental bodies are working with the tobacco industry and they don't want to clean up the military housing? Why are they trying to, mute that mold can cause illness?
I've been to Washington, D.C. a million times. I called the ACOM mold statement. I helped to cause that to be sunset, but it still gets cited. And I can tell you there comes a point, once you've done something to enable a crime or something very bad like this to continue, if you don't act to stop it when it's brought to your attention the first time, then the next time that it's brought to your attention, you have motivation to pretend like you didn't know about it. I could call it a lot of different terms, but what I think it is primarily is the epitome of the old adage, evil flourishes when good men stand by and do nothing, because they're no longer good men if they stand by and do nothing. They have motivation to have the person who is reporting the crime to them continue to be perceived as a nut or a kook, or the people who you help. There's motivation for a lot of people to have them deemed not telling the truth, malingerers, liars. And it's just like Dr. Shoemaker, Richie and I have been good friends for like 20 years. He has had to overcome a lot of adversity and naysaying by HHS affiliated scientists. After the ACOM put out their mold statement, the next year, the Manhattan Institute, which is a political think tank, paid Dr. Hardin and Dr. Kelman, the toxicologists who made up the bogus risk assessment model for ACOM. They paid them, it's either $25,000 or $40,000 to author a paper for the US Chamber of Commerce called A Scientific View of the Health Effects of Mold. And in that paper, they started marketing it to the building industry, the insurance industry, the real estate industry. The quote is that they had proven, thus, the notion that toxic mold is an insidious secret killer, as so many trial lawyers and media reports would claim, is junk science unsupported by actual scientific study. I also have the canceled checks that they got from the Manhattan Institute and the billable hours. And it doesn't matter. If you can't get HHS to stop marketing this junk science, it all continues because that's the anchor of where it is. In 2004, the Institute of Medicine did an extensive review of the illnesses. Dr. Harriet Amon, a senior toxicologist from Washington State, wrote the toxicity section for the IOM report. But what was key about the IOM toxicity section is it wrote about how animal studies cannot be used by themselves to determine causation or lack of causation, extrapolations. What ACOM was promoting as their false proof that moldy buildings don't cause these illnesses, the IOM report came in and said, no, you haven't proven that. So the Institute of Medicine damp indoor spaces and health report has always been an Achilles heel for the lying that goes on in the mold issue. The reason that the American College of Medical Toxicology is so dangerous is because they're funded by the Agency of Toxic Substance Disease Registry, ATSDR, and that's a division of CDC. So ATSDR funds ACMT to oversee what information is shared through the Association of Occupational Clinics and the Pediatric Environmental Health Specialty Units. Those institutions are located at teaching hospitals all across the country. I think there's like 28 AOECs. I can show you the documents from 2023 of somebody who came to an AOEC sick with the symptoms that you would be inclined to treat. And they were told, cut and paste verbatim, we don't believe toxic mold harms anybody. So the funding is going directly from CDC to a nonprofit medical association, to other nonprofit medical associations that are affiliated with universities around the country. It's not everybody who's involved in these organizations are horrible. It's that the leadership and the disinformation that they're being taught to promote, it all goes back to the CDC, NIOSH, CDC. Then there's another one called the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. And in 2006, they put out their mold position statement. I think it's called The Medical Effects of Mold. That one's really sneaky. It was written by Dr. Saxon, who also co-authored the ACOM mold statement, and he's listed as author in the U.S. Chamber mold statement under the premise that the allergists have proven the toxins don't cause illness. They said, thus we agree with ACOM and the IOM draft, not the IOM report, the IOM draft, that mycotoxins can't cause injuries. They're not even quoting the final version of the IOM report. Quad AI is frequently cited for other policy papers. Basically, it's a conspiracy theory run by our government, and it's been that way for 20 years. And that's why it doesn't matter how much science Dr. Shoemaker and Dr. McMahon and others can prove. I mean, I've been to Washington, D.C. with Dr. Shoemaker and Dr. McMahon. And, we've gone to the Federal Government Accountability Office and we've shown them our evidence. And we're, audit this, please get this in. It's like talking to a brick wall.
We were sharing about chronic inflammatory response syndrome from mold illness online. And then there were some doctors that shared some studies that said mold is a fake disease. And then I did some research on the people that published these papers. I think there was a Dr. Christopher Chang. He's
Oh,
new.
yeah.
Do you know who that is? Okay.
Yeah, he's
So
one of the main ones.
so I looked him up just wondering because the title says, where is this myth of mold illness from? He's the editor in chief in multiple immune allergy papers or journals. And it's, of course, he's going to get his papers published. And then if you look at all the titles of all the myth stuff, it was, or I'm sorry, mold stuff, it was all these words that were triggering of where is this mold information from, this myth, these hoax, this, without even reading about it, you see the titles and it's just negative, negative, negative. I figured there's got to be more into play than just believing that mold doesn't make us sick, but there's
There
got to be
is.
some nefarious stuff going on. And then I saw a lot of your content. Maybe if you can share, I'm sure some people listening and watching right now think, well, they must be coming from some ground or some studies that showed why they believe mycotoxins are not harmful. Maybe you can share about that rodent study and how they extrapolated it to make it seem like mold is not harmful.
In 2001, Hardin and Kellman are they're toxicologists with PhDs again. So they've never, professionally examined anyone in their lives. And they took a rodent study, what was it, intratracheally instilled something blasted into the trachea of rats. And that study found that there was inflammation in the rats and there was hemorrhaging, but it was an acute exposure of mold just being blasted in the trachea of rats. They added these hypothetical extrapolations and scenarios. From that, they concluded current scientific evidence does not support the proposition that people have been harmed by inhaled mycotoxins in home schools and offices. I mean, they don't get to decide what is current accepted science based on doing just that, but they did. And that's because it's not science, it's marketing. All they've been able to do is exert influence over all these organizations and market that false concept. So I call it the Veritox theory because the company Hardin and Kellman worked for was called Global Tox for a long time. And then they changed the name to Veritox in 2005. Now they are part of JS Held LLC, which is a huge risk management corporation for government and insurers. Their principles in it because Veritox was acquired by JS Held, but now they are even more influential than they were before. And the way it works is it's kind of like going to Walmart or doing big box shopping. You can pick out, I don't know, let's see, I'll have an expert in building science and I'll get one in toxicology and then they all work together and put together a defense. So it's not getting better, it's getting worse.
So my understanding of the theory they used was that, or the study they used was they had a rodents, they breathed in that one mycotoxin and at a very heavy dose and not for a long period of time. So you shared how some of the information is not the same as humans because we are exposed to multiple mycotoxins, not only just mold, but bacteria. But then we are also exposed for very long periods, for small amounts, and for
Correct.
multiple different things. And that's not what that study showed. But then they extrapolated that, use it as their defense to say, okay, this is workman's comp. We are no longer, or we will not cover mold illness because, like this study showed, you will not get sick even if you see mold on your building. And I've been contacted by many, many people living in the military housing saying, we literally live in black mold, but they're doing nothing about it because, again, their
Right.
stance is mold does not make you sick.
Right. And to be clear, Hardin and Kellman did not do any study. They did a literature review of
Okay.
someone else's work. And then they pulled out their calculators, added those extrapolations and some hypothetical situations. And, voila, according to ACOM and everybody else, they've established current accepted science. There's a lot of reasons why this continues. And one of them is the insurance industry, they've got some pretty big political action committees that fund for politicians to stay in office. Dr. Chang, and who's the guy he publishes with a lot? Gershwin, I think it is, or
I can't remember, but I remember he's an editor in three different journals. And I was like, oh, that's why it makes sense why he's publishing all of these articles that are against mold.
right. But I think he's also affiliated with the University of California, I believe.
I think he is in Davis. Yeah, UC Davis.
Right. Okay. So people don't realize this either. When employees of universities serve as expert defense witnesses, they do not keep the money themselves typically because they're an employee of the university. The university keeps the majority of the income from their expert testimonies. So if you have an expert defense witness who's a professional liar, basically for the defense and the insurance industry, the universities are generating income off of that. And so there's motivation there for them to not advance the understanding too. When Javier Becerra became appointed Secretary of HHS, I kind of just stopped dead in my tracks with what I was asking the regents, the University of California, to do. He has been enabling to continue prior to becoming HHS Secretary and is now HHS Secretary. So it's not like everybody who is involved in this are just horrible, awful, awful people. It's that it's such an insidious little crime that it's difficult to perceive that this could really be happening in the United States. Why it's just simple spins of science that are at the root of the problem. I talk to government decision makers from time to time. Their eyes just glaze over. So it's marketing fraud. It's whatever you want to call it. It's fraud.
I mean,
So
it's hard because I think about the ramifications if they acknowledge that mold from water damaged buildings is a legit illness that causes SIRS, that causes many other illnesses. If they acknowledge that, it would cost, I'm guessing, trillions of dollars to redo homes, how we're using drywall, for example, that is so conducive to building or growing mold. And I wonder, is it a lot of that? Is it just the government
I
doesn't want
think
to?
it's I think it's more the bottleneck is the liability for those who have enabled this to continue for so long that are decision makers. As far as the buildings, I don't know that you would have to go in and redo all of them, but it would become known that you need to be extremely vigilant
Right.
to keep the water damage down and address it immediately. The fraud is on the health side of the issue. The way they control the liability is by promoting that the buildings are not capable of causing the illnesses that they really do.
Can I
Do you
ask
want to go
you?
into the criminal aspect of the issue?
Yes. So why
I
don't
haven't
you?
gotten to the criminal aspect.
Yes. So why don't you share how when you had the water leak, because you have experience with health marketing and you can maybe explain that, but how you try to share what you found and then instead you ended up being in jail.
Being retaliated against for telling the truth.
Right.
Yeah. I had a leak in an ice maker line in the fall of 2001, right when Melinda had just gotten her $32 million verdict and HHS was starting to work with expert defense witnesses. I had the misfortune of having a leak in a water line that a mold remediation company didn't know what they were doing and they blew the mold all over the house and we got sick. And so I got the bird's eye view right from the beginning of people being called liars and scammers for saying we're sick. And I have a daughter who has cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disease where both parents carry the recessive gene, and it can be fatal. People with CF also have extreme susceptibility to fungi, primarily aspergillus, is my understanding. When the company botched our home, the remediation, it was extremely dangerous for her and we couldn't go home. I'd never been in litigation before, but our homeowner insurer sued us for not accepting $30,000 after they made the house uninhabitable. And we countersued. And by I think it was October 2003, we had a settlement from our homeowner insurer, the lab that falsely cleared the house, and the remediation company. And I can't tell you how much we got from our homeowners insurer because I have a confidentiality agreement, but I can tell you that we got close to $500,000 altogether. So I got really sick in the home because I had my office in there. And I was going to all these doctors. They were like, no, mold doesn't cause that. You're just, mold is gold. You're just trying to, I'm like, no, I've never been a liar in my life. I'm serious. And so my daughter was treating through the UC healthcare system. They're like one of the greatest in the world when it comes to addressing the cystic fibrosis. And um, we couldn't be any better than that. But my daughter was able to get treatment because she was immunocompromised. But for me, they were like, no, it doesn't happen. So I had to go to San Francisco and treat with a fungal specialist who used to be affiliated with Stanford. And then he lost his adjunct professorship when he started really speaking out about mold. But he was great. Dr. Vincent Marinkovich, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was
So he lost the professorship because he spoke out against mold.
Yeah, he was serving as a plaintiff expert, and he also spoke out for another physician who was being attacked. So Dr. Marinkovich was an amazing man, and I recovered. And I also, you'll like this too. One of the things Dr. Marinkovich firmly believed in was that people should eat ground, fresh beef. That was part of the protocol. Yeah, that you needed that in your diet. So I could have moved on from this issue, but not in good conscience. By the end of October, I was like, wait a minute, if they could do this to my family, I'm a fairly outspoken individual and educated, and if they could do that to me, what are they doing to these poor mothers who are living in low income housing and have children who, their kids aren't learning in school and they're sick all the time and they're just going down farther. So I just couldn't walk away in good conscience. I hooked up with Dr. Simone Summer. They'd been through a mold problem too, she and her son. And in September of 2004, we had a mold caucus in Washington, D.C. It was sponsored by Congressman John Conyers. Bianca Jagger was the keynote speaker. That's where I first met Richie. That's how far back we go. I've just been advocating ever since. I ended up moderating a United States Senate staff briefing about this in January of 2006. It was sponsored by Senator Kennedy and Senator Jeffords. And I brought in Dr. Marinkovich, Dr. Shoemaker, Dr. Chin Yang. He's a microbiologist who's amazing. He knows so much about the buildings. And Dr. David Sherris, who is an ENT from the Mayo Clinic. And they had found that a lot of the sinus infections, I think it was something like 90%, they felt were fungal in origin.
Wow.
In October, Senator Kennedy ordered a federal GAO audit of the issue at my urging. And I know that Richie and them, they still use that. I used my degree in marketing to raise awareness of the fraud in the issue. March of 2005, I published a writing on PR Web called Jury Finds Toxic Mold Harmed Oregon Family Arbitration Clause Not Binding. And what it was about was Dr. Kilman's testimony in a case in Oregon where he got caught on the witness stand having to explain how ACOM was related to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in marketing his information. And I still have the testimony. It was such a bad one for him. What I wrote about in 2005 was how to trap them. I made a public announcement. This is how you can beat them in court. Here's how they're marketing the fraud. Here's who all's involved. And that went over like a lead balloon. And they sued me in California for one accurate sentence in the writing. Upon being presented documents from a prior case in Arizona, Dr. Kilman altered his under oath statements on the witness stand, which he did. I was just writing about how he got trapped having to say, no, these papers aren't related. They are related. Since 2005, the California courts have been used to frame me for libel for that sentence. They've suppressed the evidence that CDC NIOSH Deputy Director Hardin is a co-owner of the SLAP plaintiff. Government agencies don't have to be disclosed in some litigations as an interested party. Long story short, I can prove that HHS has been an interested party and seen me framed for libel since 2005. False hearsay documents got into the jury room. Jurors submitted affidavits on my behalf. Dr. Kelman committed perjury to make up a reason why I would have malice for him. And that malice is a key element in libel. That all got suppressed. After the appellate court issued this horrible ruling after the trial in 2010, a month later, they filed a second lawsuit seeking to permanently enjoin me from telling about it. The SLAP, it's called Strategic Litigation Against Public Participation, SLAP suits.
Wow.
So the California courts have been used to case fix SLAP for HHS and its policy deformers since 2005. I had attorneys up through the trial, but after that, it had already cost me over $500,000 to defend myself. And it was obvious they weren't going to pay any attention to the facts anyway. So I just started defending myself since then. It's just been a nightmare. In the second lawsuit, they sought to permanently enjoin me from talking. Well, of course, I didn't stop complaining to government decision makers. You have to do something about this. And here's the slap fixing. So then they found me to be in civil contempt of court because I wouldn't shut up. And civil contempt is not a crime. It's called coercion. They are trying to coerce you to do something. They jailed me because I wouldn't sign a document that says, I do not believe Dr. Kelman committed perjury. They were trying to coerce me into signing that, and I wouldn't do it. So I was in jail for about 2 days in the Women's Las Colinas Detention Center. And I did get sick from the experience because they made me clean the toilets at Tweakers while I was in there. It wasn't terribly scary, but it was scary that a California judge would work with HHS's hardened attorney to jail me for refusing to be coerced to sign a false confession. They also gave me a false criminal FBI record while I was in jail. They put it down as criminal contempt of court. And I never would have even known that if it weren't for a private sector website called Jailbase. I had to motion for that to be, they gave me a false criminal record, and the San Diego County Sheriff Department would not remove it for like 7 or 8 months. If you can get a judge to get involved in a crime with you, you're in like Flynn, because Department of Justices do not prosecute case fixing jurists. That's just the way it is. So it's all kind of, it's a big bottleneck in there.
You say that this illness is a hate crimes towards the environmentally ill. From what I'm hearing from you, you don't think it's necessarily that it would cost so much to just fix the buildings, but that these small fraudulent ways to look at science, and then now it's just become a bigger and bigger issue. But
right, it's snowballed. And what would cost so much? It's not fixing the buildings that would cost so much. It's that the insurance industry would be on the hook for greater amounts of money if it was recognized that negligence by their insureds were causing these deaths and illnesses. People might get $200,000 settlement now for some things, but in the future, it would not be unreasonable if things were acknowledged correctly to see, like $5 million settlements occurring. So that's why they fight so hard to keep the science deformed. It's just like big tobacco, how they fought so hard to keep it hidden that cigarettes can cause these deaths and illnesses because they don't want to pay for it. it's a massive problem, but when you boil it down into small pieces, it's very simple. HHS needs to stop marketing scientific fraud. The Department of Justice needs to hold these California judges and the HHS policy deformers as slap plaintiffs accountable for the criminal slap fixing they've been doing. You can't solve a crime while pretending that no crime is existing.
Right.
I mean, that it just perpetuates and it keeps going and keeps going. And I'm afraid it really is going to be a whole nother generation that we lose to children with cognitive problems that can't learn as well as they should, or they're sick with allergies and asthma that they shouldn't have. And I'm afraid it's going to be a whole nother generation like that if somebody doesn't step up to the plate and get control of this issue.
It's hard also because when I share about mold illness, even online, people don't realize that they're supporting this fraudulence by saying mold is everywhere. You have to live with it. A long time ago, we had mold and it was fine. We've always lived with mold. It's fine. It's not a big deal. And I think what really dawned on me was when you were speaking out about a lot of this, we in the wellness industry, especially in the eating meat community, we know that we've been taught that red meat is bad, saturated fat is bad, when it's not really when we get into the science. And it's the
Right.
same thing. When we think that mold is not bad for us and mold is everywhere, we're perpetuating these lies that I guess the HHS and all these governmental bodies have put these lies into our minds. And now we're just perpetuating it by sharing it with our loved ones and say, you're not sick from mold. There's no way you're getting sick or that sick because of mold. And we're just exacerbating the crimes against these environmentally really ill people.
That's true. And it is. I mean, a lot of times people don't even realize that they're part of the problem rather than
Right.
the solution. And I mean, I think that even applies to, some government decision makers on the Hill. I think they really think they are trying to help by putting in all these new rules for the military housing landlords, which the landlords aren't following, but they're not. You're never going to be able to solve the mold problem without acknowledging that there's a crime occurring on the medical
Right.
side of the issue. And it's a government backed crime, and it's been coming out of HHS since 2001.
It's just so hard for me to understand how all of this can happen and they let it go. So people in the military that's supposed to protect our country are getting sickened by our own government in the housing they are given. And I had somebody on that's a US Army veteran who makes their own special meat because it's the thing they could tolerate because they didn't know about the mold illness in the buildings that they were living in. And
Mm-hmm.
and then you think about workman's comp, where all these people that are saying, I feel sick from the building. And then they're like, no, you're not. Mold can't make you sick. So they're declined. And it's just so unfortunate that all of this is going on. And it's because a few people just put bad science into papers. So, knowing all of this information and all this unfortunate information, what are some things that us as the people can start doing? And obviously, one that I would advocate is to stop saying that mold cannot hurt people and mold is everywhere. There's nothing we can do. It's not a big deal. I think that's the first step we can start doing is acknowledging that people can get sick from mold. Is there anything else that you can think of?
Well, I think what people should do is they should listen to practitioners like you and Dr. Shoemaker. And once people start getting better, it's kind of like a form of marketing. The more and
Right.
more people who recover from that, the more and more the public knows it. But as far as changing the fraud in government, the only thing that can be done, there needs to be prosecutions. That's all there is to it. You can't, and I don't see that happening in the near future, although I'm working on it as hard as I can. My main premise has always been I want the doctors to be taught how to recognize, diagnose, and treat mycotic diseases. And the way that you do that is you get the fraud out of policies so that the real science can move into the policies. And then Department of Health and Human Services and other agencies can, cause the correct education of physicians on a large scale. And what that does, it doesn't just help to cure people, it helps to thwart the illnesses in the first place because doctors would know early on.
Right.
If somebody comes in with these symptoms, hey, have you thought about you might need to get out of, you need to.
I think that's exactly correct. I just worked with a mother who has two young girls that are very sick. And she
Mm,
came to me thinking that maybe I need to fix the diet, maybe I need to fix the gut. As I met with her, it was clearly mold illness. So she tested and they're positive, and their markers are very out of range. Before then, and her daughter, the youngest one, is just barely 5. So you can
mm,
tell how young they are, but they've been to a gastroenterologist, endocrine support, and they've been diagnosed with all these different things. But obviously, the root cause is the mold that's then exacerbating all the symptoms and systems to go awry. But had I not known about this, I wouldn't have even told her. And the only reason she's going down this path of mold illness is because I shed some light because I knew about it. And all the other doctors are saying you should do endocrine support or hormonal support at 5. A 5-year-old starting
mhm.
Hashimoto's treatment, that's it's wild. Or for her to have gut issues because she's constipated, or maybe there's something more underlying. And it's just been a big wake up call. And again, it's if I had I not seen Dr. Shoemaker's work, I would have been like, yeah, maybe we do an elimination protocol and do some more gut healing without her ever fully getting better. And the time is now ticking because she is now ill with this illness. And had we not known or taken it seriously, or the mother taken it seriously, she would have no light right now. But she does, as much as it's overwhelming. Now she's aware of this illness that's causing her to young children to be really, really sick.
I
Yeah,
hate that.
I
I
know.
really hate it when it's the little ones. They
I
break my
know.
heart because they're developing. I mean, that those are key development
I know.
years when you're little like that for not, just mental and social and personality. I mean, it's just that's what keeps me in this game.
Me too.
I am a bleeding heart for the little children that are
Same.
being devastated by this. So
And you just can't help but wonder if the buildings were just created properly, we acknowledged it, maybe they would have never been in this situation. And it
yeah.
just makes me so sad. So that's why I think the work you are doing is so important. Are there other things that you can think of that we can protect ourselves from your, decades of being able to advocate for this now?
If you feel like you're being retaliated against, don't just let it slide like, oh, well, they just don't know. They don't understand. I think they must have, because I'm like an empathetic person. I should have come out with both this swinging 18 years ago about the corruption of the judges right away.
Right.
But I thought, well, maybe they just didn't understand because I know they're having this stuff marketed to them and maybe they think I am, but that's not what happened. It's criminal. What's going on is criminal. And so my best piece of advice to you, if you feel like you're being retaliated against for speaking out, it's wise to nip that in the bud right off the bat.
I have a client that is now aware that she has sensitivities to mold and VOCs. And as she's looking for a new house to stay or rent, she'll tell the landlord, oh, I have a mold sensitivity. And she thought that would be the way to then make sure there's no mold in the place. And instead, they deny her housing. So they say, oh, they'll call her back, or they won't even call back. And they'll say, oh, we're fully booked now. And it's so now she can't tell people she's sensitive to mold, otherwise, she'll never get housing. I have another client that tried to get a mold insurance for damages in the home. They got denied because there's a cap on mold, but
Mm-hmm.
he tried to get life insurance and they declined him, saying that your doctor said you have chronic inflammatory response syndrome and we cannot give you life insurance because you have that illness. So in
Mm-hmm.
every which way they're trying not to pay for things, they're doing that. And it's heartbreaking. It truly is.
It is heartbreaking, but it's not all based on evil from the, like I used to be a real estate agent in Rancho Santa Fe. If I was going to rent a house to someone on behalf of my clients and somebody told me they're very sensitive to mold, I would have a moral dilemma because I would understand that person's predicament, but I would also have a fiduciary duty
Right.
to the landlord to not bring someone in who is probably going to be high maintenance environmentally. So the reason I say that is because people often think all landlords are horrible people and all the defense attorneys are crooked, and it's not true. It's a multifaceted issue, and you just have to keep peeling back the layers to get to the root of where it is, and then remove that, and a lot of the problems will self-correct on their own if that's taken care of.
Well, thank you so much for all the information you shared. It was so eye-opening to see a lot of your videos where you shared all the corruption that's going on, how you're standing in front of judges and stating your case. That's so respectable. And I feel like sometimes I'm trying to go against the grain, but what I see you do, I have so much respect for you. Where can people find
Thank you.
you?
Somebody who's really looking for me, they can find me on the internet. I'd like to concentrate my time more on giving them hell in Washington right now than doing anything else. So,
Do you see people get better from mold illness?
yes. I mean, this is just anecdotally speaking because I'm not a physician or
Sure,
anything, but it
sure.
seems like those who were exposed for shorter periods of time seem to have the best opportunity to completely recover. So the faster that you become aware of what it is that's making you sick, it seems like the better your chances of completely recovering. But that's just my perception from being in this issue for so long.
Yeah, I think there's merit to that. As much as the mother was so overwhelmed by her daughter's diagnosis, I said the same. The thing is, she's so young, so she could
Mhm.
probably get over this quickly. And so that's the silver lining in it all. But thank you so much again for sharing your time and for the advocacy you're doing, because I don't think people or our community may have heard of you, but you are fighting, on the Hill to help some of these very, very chronically ill that don't even know that they're suffering from mold. So thank you.
Right. Right. Well, thank you. Thank you for interviewing me.
Okay, guys, I hope that this conversation about the billion-dollar fraud that we've probably never heard of was eye-opening for you. When we now say that mold is not really something we should be scared of, or that mold is everywhere and it's really not a big deal, we have to understand where that fraud is coming from. And we are perpetuating the fraudulence by saying these things to our friends and family and loved ones, especially people that are actually dealing with this illness. I hope this conversation gives you a pause to think about. It's just a sad state, but the more we know as people and the more we are educated, we are able to empower ourselves and then empower our neighbors and our loved ones so that we can bring about change. And it takes people like Sharon to go to the Hill and then keep advocating. While it's a monstrous issue, things can change, and we have to have hope that it can. Thank you, Sharon, for coming on my channel and for just enlightening us and doing the work when you could have just made that money, got the case, and then moved on with your life. But instead, you are advocating for the people that don't have a voice, don't have the funds, don't have the resources to hopefully have a better life and a better chance at getting to root cause healing. Okay, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat, take care of your bodies, and take care of your homes, because it's the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.